Speaker is Dan Emerson from Casella Waste Systems. Dan serves as the Regional Vice President of Operation and has over 27 years of industry experience. Interestingly, Dan was raised in the industry as part of a family-owned business that started in 1945 by his grandfather. That business was known as George Emerson and Sons. I will now turn things over to Dan Emerson.
Thank you, Kevin. Let me share my screen here. How's that?
Perfect.
Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to talk about one of the most challenging issues in the waste industry. As you're all aware, solid waste management has evolved from open burning dumps to today's highly sophisticated and engineered disposal facilities. As this industry evolves and technology advances, logistics, transportation, and disposal become extremely critical in managing waste day to day. In many situations, collection operations around the region are having to find solutions for their volumes on a daily basis due to capacity issues, maintenance, shutdowns, and even wait times. But first, here's a quick overview of Casella's operations in the Northeast. As you can see, Casella is a regionally integrated solid waste, recycling, and resource services company. Our assets are well positioned in the Northeast. We have a robust transfer station network with 58 transfer stations that allow us to effectively move waste, C&D, and recyclables to our disposal and processing facilities. Within our footprint, Casella has 46 collection operations from northern Maine to western New York, running 843 collection vehicles. Even with the challenges in the recycling commodity markets, as mentioned earlier, Casella remains committed to prioritizing recycling to reduce those volumes entering incinerators and landfills. Because of this long-standing philosophy, Casella has invested in the operation of 20 recycling facilities. In addition, Casella operates 9 disposal facilities, and 3 of those house energy projects from collected landfill gas. Now, before I get into some of the disposal challenges we're facing, I thought it would be important to go through the sheer volume of material we handle, not just on an annual basis, but on a more granular level to help put into perspective the tons of material generated on a daily basis. I put together some quick estimates for just Maine, Mass, and New Hampshire on the following slide. For MSW, recycling and C&D tons collected on Casella trucks per day in Maine alone, we pick up 1,897 tons on a daily basis. We pick up 690 tons per day in New Hampshire and 1,118 tons per day in Massachusetts. Again, these are only on Casella trucks and tons, not including competitors. For third-party deliveries to Casella facilities, we accept 2,479 tons per day in Maine, 737 tons per day in New Hampshire, and 2,097 tons per day in Massachusetts. In addition to those volumes, Casella accepts non-hazardous special wastes such as ash, contaminated soils, and sludges. Between Maine, Mass, and New Hampshire, that's another 1,950 tons per day. All of this totals 10,768 tons per day, or 2.7 million tons annually, just in Maine, Mass, and New Hampshire. Again, only tons that Casella handles or accepts. This volume is managed daily with no exceptions. We need to make sure our trucks and transfer stations are empty every day as efficiently as possible to ensure no service interruptions the following day. As disposal markets in the Northeast continue to diminish, our ability to operate efficiently has been greatly impacted. In this slide, you'll see the facilities in red that have closed since 2012, which totals 3.1 million tons of capacity and flexibility removed from the market. With this many landfill facilities closing, the incinerators have been forced to pick up the slack with no viable backup plan, leading to long lines and wait times. During certain times of the year, or if a facility experiences maintenance issues, trucks can sit in line for 2+ hours or be directed to find alternative disposal sites. This is where the lives of collection and transportation operators get interesting. When these situations occur, operators are left with full trucks, incomplete routes, or route delays, impacting customer service. Drivers have legal limits of driving time per day and per week that now become a balancing act to manage. Many of you on this call today are aware of the CDL driver shortage, and that alone makes moving waste around the region that much more challenging. We're now having to transport waste distances that require multiple trucks and drivers with staging yards to manage the time it takes to turn trailers, not to mention the carbon impact that is having on the environment, as well as the additional heavy trucks on our highways. Having no other disposal options in the marketplace leaves no room for error. Incinerators have a capacity as well as a requirement for maintenance. When incinerators shut down for maintenance, whether it's scheduled or not, that volume needs to go somewhere, and this is where logistics and transportation networks become critical. Collection operations are constantly shifting volumes and trucks to make sure they're empty for the following day. The pandemic has also shifted the sources of waste generation. Casella has seen residential volumes increase by 15 to 30% due to people being home, ordering online, and simply consuming more. This has only made the disposal challenges worse. These are facilities, there are facilities in the region which are in danger of closing if expansions or other arrangements can't be made to keep them operating, which could lead to another 2.2 million ton shortfall in the market. Closing facilities at this rate and within close proximity to the various markets is forcing transportation of waste to facilities much further away, ultimately having an impact on our carbon footprint and environmental sustainability, not to mention the costs associated with moving waste such long distances and dramatically increasing consumer costs. Costs in the last 2 years increased by 15 to 25% in transportation and disposal costs, depending on the market. Volumes are being shifted to the nearest facility possible. However, the most critical logistic everyone must keep in mind is that every company is trying to secure volume somewhere and everywhere to make sure we can continue servicing our customers, our municipalities, and other critical infrastructure such as healthcare and essential industries. Again, many of the existing facilities are at capacity, and one mishap, shutdown, or maintenance issue creates a logistical nightmare for operators. This next slide illustrates at very high level the issues we may experience given expected waste generation increase in facility shortfall. What I've just explained is creating a supply-demand imbalance. And as you can see, New York's tons disposed in gray is increasing, consuming the excess capacity, and by 2024 is in danger of not meeting its ability to handle the volume that society is creating. Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine are at risk of the same situation. Massachusetts is the really alarming state, however. Over the next 4 years, Massachusetts will be exporting 2.3 million tons per year, with the majority going to New York and Ohio. Casella is transporting by rail nearly 35,000 tons per year to Ohio and transporting nearly 215,000 tons per year to various New York landfills. So what does all this mean? It means that we haven't done a good job in the Northeast at maintaining sustainable, consistent, short and long-term market capacity. While we continue to strive for a more circular economy, we're just not there yet in many cases. Today's landfills, and I can only speak to Casella's landfills, are again highly engineered and designed to protect the environment as well as being a renewable energy resource. In fact, the EPA used to advocate a waste hierarchy that ranked waste to energy incineration above landfilling. In 2012, based on modern operating practices and data, EPA revised its waste hierarchy to include landfills with energy recovery on the same tier as a waste to energy incinerator. Landfills are consistent, the backbone of solid waste management and a necessary part of the comprehensive infrastructure. Many of you have been following the MRC's facility in central Maine, now known as Coastal Resources of Maine, formerly Fiberite. CRM is closed and currently investigating options to reopen that facility. While the industry continues to explore and vet the next generation of solid waste processing technology, the industry still needs traditional infrastructure to serve as a bridge to the time when these projects are sustainable. We feel today's landfills are that solution, and as we develop technologies and successfully implement them, the landfills used today will not only extend their life, but in the meantime will maintain our ability to manage the overwhelming daily volume that society is generating and every company is handling. That concludes my presentation today. Thank you all for your time and attention this morning. I'd be happy to answer any questions. And before I do, Kevin, I'd just comment on one of your opening remarks, and as I've laid out through my presentation, in the unprecedented times that we're all in today, it's been pretty remarkable when our trucks, service our customers curbside. The amount of people that are working at home today recognize what we do. We do essential work. We typically have not in the past been recognized for that, but as people are home, when we do run on delays or they do get missed for whatever reason, our customer care center phone calls blow up. So it's interesting, as people follow and watch what we're doing, they're really paying attention to their trash and recycling services day to day. It's pretty comical the amount of phone calls that we get today now that people are working from home.
Great. Thank you. First question for you, Dan. Do haulers and facilities need to swap loads and deliveries between competitors for efficiencies? And is this allowed or overlooked by regulators?
Yeah, we don't swap loads. Material that comes into our facilities. So if you look at a transfer station specifically, transfer stations are a conduit to transfer waste to its end site, but there's no swapping of anything. So one of the remarks I made earlier, when we have to stage trailers when we're shipping loads to New York, all we're doing is just simply staging a trailer so that another driver who has the legal hours available to them to continue shipping that trailer to the New York landfill. But no, there is no swapping waste of any such.
Okay. Next question. How can municipalities combat shortfalls as prices only continue to increase?
It's a great question. One of the things we're seeing, and I think Mike brought it up earlier in New Hampshire, we have a lot of municipalities that are considering not implementing or shutting down their recycling programs to save on the cost of recycling and the disposal cost of that, or recycling cost of that, versus disposal. The disposal costs are much less than it is to recycle. Unfortunately, a lot of municipalities are taking advantage of that as a company, and the long-standing philosophy that Casella's had, we do not embrace that. We don't support that. Unfortunately, under contract, we may have to service those municipalities in that manner, but we encourage recycling. It's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to divert material outside of landfills and incinerators. But that's a question that I think, as a company, we look at every day to reduce our costs so that we can provide cost-effective services to our customers.
Kind of along a similar vein, question was, what is the tip fee status and are there future projections?
I'm not sure I understand the question, the status.
I'm not sure I do either. Maybe that person can be a little more specific in that and revise their question. In the meantime, another question came in. Dan, what are your views about packaging stewardship proposals?
Yeah, so that's another one of those diverting opportunities. And, if you look at the packaging and the amount of packaging that's consumed to package products, it's really overwhelming. And if we look to divert material out of our landfills and incinerators, that's really where we need to focus a lot of our attention. And capital investment is to figure out, minimal packaging and depackaging in order to recycle those products.
Next question. Is there anything regulators can do to support, to address the waste management shortfalls?
Another good question. Yeah, so, you know, as an organization, we're constantly looking for opportunities for capacity. And I think a lot of our competitors are as well, trying to figure out what the short-term and long-term viable resources and solutions are to dispose of waste, given the challenges that we're facing. So we're constantly looking at siting locations in various markets that we're in to site whether it's a landfill or a transfer station capacity that we can look forward to in the future.
Okay. Next question. Are there projections for tip fees for MSW in the next 5 years in the Northeast?
Well, I can tell you if, you know, history presents itself going forward, you know, the inflation that we've experienced over the last couple of years, if we can't continue vetting out long-term viable disposal options, you know, I think the cost of managing and moving waste is going to continue to climb. It's hard to say, you know, how high, but if we can't continue to find more local market disposal solutions, you know, we're going to be impacted by the cost of moving waste around the market in the Northeast.
Great. Any other questions? Some are still trickling in here. Do any of the panelists have questions for Dan?
Just going back to, you know, you talked a little bit about what's going to happen, Dan, with tipping fees over the next 5 years, 5 or 10 years, and I would agree on your perspective on that. But with your history in the industry, you know, what do you think will play out? What's your vision of the industry for the long term, maybe 10 to 20 years out? How do you think things will look?
Well, my crystal ball, Kevin, has been broken for the last 27 years, and certainly didn't expect to see the waste industry evolve the way it has. But if it continues to evolve the way it has, which we would all hope that it does, we would continue focusing on, as we have been, diverting material from the waste streams and not consuming as much as we have been. We're a society that consumes a lot. We generate a lot of waste. We generate a lot of recycling. So, you know, to the point that we've been talking about earlier is how do we focus on packaging? How do we focus on recycling, diversion from landfills, diversion from incinerators, reducing our carbon footprint, and building a more sustainable, circular economy where, you know, I don't think there'll ever be zero landfills, just solely based on the types of materials that, you know, we potentially can't recycle. But again, I think over the next 20 years, we'll continue to evolve, and the push is really going to be diversion and reduce, reuse, recycle, and find better ways to not consume as much as we have been.
Another question that just came in specific to Massachusetts. With all the landfill closures in Massachusetts, do you see the state allowing for new landfills to open?
Well, I can't speak for the regulators in Massachusetts, but you know, that's been a struggle in Massachusetts. You know, with fostering landfills, they have not been, you know, wanting to really site a landfill. You know, there's some work that I think is being done. How far it gets is really to be determined. But with the activity of closing landfills that we've been experiencing over the last several years, I'm not sure there's a lot of hope for that, but that's to be determined.
Sure. Mike, it looks like you've got your hand raised there.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So Dan, I have a question, I guess, both from a standpoint of your company, but also just across the industry. Most of the landfills, at least in New Hampshire that we have, are pretty monochromatic in terms of the services they provide. They pretty much are a landfill. They operate that way. Obviously, they're in the past, we have seen facilities that have multiple waste treatment or recycling technologies located on the same site. That's diminished a little bit in recent years, but I'm wondering if you see, again, from your company's perspective or across the industry, any movement towards, having a variety of technologies available. So landfill that would also have co-located with it an anaerobic digester or a composting facility or a MRF, basically, or pick your favorite diversion and recycling technology. What do you see as far as trends moving forward in that regard?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mike. And, there would be nothing better than to have a campus with all of those types of technologies on one property to be able to manage. But that's, unfortunately very capital intensive at the same time. And trying to find those facilities and properties to be able to do that, with the opposition that this industry experiences today, how do we find and site that location, in each market, in each state, to be able to create a very comprehensive site design that includes, disposal capacity, energy recovery, anaerobic digestion, recycling processing, just a number of different technologies that would be great to have on one campus. And I guess if I go back to the question that Kevin asked earlier, that would be, a vision, I think, for a lot of us that we could probably share and probably look to try to implement. Are there areas where we could cite a project like that could house a lot of those technologies that you just referred to?
Thank you. Question that just came in. Two basic components, transportation and disposal. What are the relative cost proportions and percentages for each? Do you expect this to change as transport logistics become more complex?
So it varies by market, and it really depends on how far we're shipping waste. But, in trying to keep a market whole, if you're moving waste locally, your tipping fee is going to be higher and your trans cost is going to be lower. But if you're having to move waste outside of a market and you're traveling much further, the likelihood is, your tip fees are a little lower and your trans costs are higher. But it really depends on the market. Right now, it's kind of all over the board, depending on where that waste and volume is going. We've seen a lot of activity in the last few years with rail activity, moving C&D and MSW outside of the Northeast to mid-state landfills, mainly Ohio. And rail has been growing considerably in the last couple of years, like I said. So, that's a developing movement of material and a transportation network that we can leverage and take advantage of. But, it really, at the end of the day, if we could find a way to manage our own waste that we generate and have a more sustainable long-term approach within our markets, we could maintain lower costs to be able to do that.
Thank you for that. And Dan, could you comment on the impacts of the challenges of decreased recycling markets due to China's national sword policy? Do you see signs of improved markets within the U.S.?
Yeah, we already have. So, as that national sword policy was implemented, markets in the Northeast are starting to evolve. And, the domestic markets, are starting to grow. And we're taking advantage of that. We're not slowing. Again, our philosophy is to recycle, and we have processing facilities that allow us to do that. So we want to maximize those and encourage that. And we'll continue to grow with the evolution of the domestic markets as they continue to grow and evolve.
Great. And is Casella considering electric transport vehicles, fleet vehicles?
We have talked about that. You know, I think there's a lot of technology that still needs to advance, and some experience that we need to figure out. You know, one thing that we need to consider in the Northeast with electric vehicles is sustainability. Not only that, we have to think about, you know, how heavy duty those trucks are. One of the challenges we've seen with the studies of electric vehicles in the Northeast is how do they handle from a power standpoint in inclement weather? How are they going to hold up, you know, in a landfill at disposal sites? How are they going to perform in general? There's not enough data yet, at least from our perspective, but they are on our radar, and we're watching the research and the data on that equipment, and we'll be following it very closely as we continue to drive down our carbon footprint as a company.
And one last question: are tires recycled, or are they landfilled or burned?
So the majority of our markets, the tires are collected and recycled. We discourage landfilling tires at all. Some get through the system, and we do charge. We have facilities that will remove them and recover them for recycling, and that's really the intent, to keep those out of our disposal facilities.
Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Dan.